A lot of people spend the last 10 years before retirement asking only one question: do I have enough? That sounds sensible. It sounds responsible. It sounds like the question a prudent person should ask. But I have spent most of my life around money, businesses, balance sheets, and human behavior. And I can tell you that another question becomes just as important once retirement stops being an abstract word and starts becoming a real date on the calendar. What is still sitting in your life that quietly costs more than it gives? That is the question people avoid, because it feels less glamorous. It does not involve a hot investment. It does not involve a higher market return. It does not involve a sophisticated tax move or a clever portfolio strategy. It involves subtraction. And subtraction is hard for people because the human mind gets attached to what it already owns, what it already pays for, what it already built, and what it already used to be. Still, I have learned that freedom is often less about adding one more good thing and more about releasing 5 old burdens that no longer belong in the life ahead. That truth becomes especially important near retirement, because retirement changes the meaning of everything. A house is no longer just a house. A vehicle is no longer just a vehicle. An account is no longer just an account. A hobby asset is no longer just an indulgence. A side business is no longer just a source of pride. Once you move from accumulation years into preservation years, every item in your life changes its job description. What used to be manageable can become draining. What used to be rewarding can become noisy. What used to represent progress can begin representing friction. What used to fit your life can begin resisting your life. That is why I do not think retirement planning is only a question of what to own. It is also a question of what to stop carrying. I want to begin with a memory because memories often tell the truth faster than spreadsheets do. When I was younger, I knew people who had homes full of things they had gathered across a lifetime, not just furniture layers. Boxes, stacks, old magazines, unused dishes, clothes that no longer fit the life or the body, decorations nobody truly saw anymore, gadgets that had long since become part of the wallpaper. The house had become less like a place to live and more like a museum of unfinished decisions. And then one day the person had to move. The larger house was gone. The spare rooms were gone. Most of the stuff was gone. And what struck me was not the sadness people expected. It was the relief that has stayed with me for years, because it reveals something most people only admit late in life. We do not just own things. Things begin owning little pieces of us. They own our attention. They own our weekends. They own our decisions. They own our storage. They own our maintenance budget. They own our future options. And because the cost comes in drips instead of one dramatic invoice, people rarely notice how much life is being spent servicing yesterday's choices. Retirement is one of the few seasons when a person gets a natural invitation to look around and say what here still earns its place. That is the language I like. Earning its place, because sentiment is not enough, habit is not enough, pride is not enough. If something is going to travel with you into retirement, it should be doing real work for your life. It should support peace, flexibility, joy, simplicity, usefulness, meaning, or actual deliberate pleasure. If it is not doing that, then it is probably functioning as weight. And weight gets more expensive as time becomes more precious. That is the first major shift people miss. Retirement does not merely reduce income. It increases the value of time. If you are 50 and working hard, you can still tell yourself that one day you will deal with the extra house, the extra car, the extra clutter, the high-fee investments, the side business you no longer enjoy, or the rental property that keeps calling you at bad hours. Work momentum can hide many inefficiencies. Retirement removes that camouflage. All of a sudden, the thing that used to feel manageable begins feeling heavy, because now you see it more clearly. Now you feel the maintenance more directly. Now the paperwork is not buried beneath a full work week. Now the drain is more obvious. That is why some retirees are surprised by how rich they look on paper and how constrained they feel in daily life. It is not always because they miscalculated the portfolio. Sometimes it is because they dragged too much of the old life into the new season. The first thing that deserves ruthless honesty is the house that no longer matches the life ahead. This is always emotional. So let us tell the truth about that first. A house is not only square footage, it holds memories. Children grew there, Christmas mornings happened there, arguments happened there, careers were built there, pets ran through there, walls absorbed years. So when someone says you might not need the same house in retirement, they are not merely talking about real estate. They are touching memory, identity, and the illusion that holding the house is the same thing as holding the life that happened inside it. It is not that distinction matters. I have seen perfectly intelligent people stay in homes that no longer fit their needs because leaving felt like betrayal. But the house does not know your loyalty. It only knows what it costs to keep breathing. Property taxes continue. Insurance continues. Utilities continue. Repairs continue. Landscaping continues. Cleaning continues. Roofs do not grow sentimental and stop aging. Water heaters do not care that your children once played in the hallway. A large house can become an engine that converts retirement years into maintenance hours and cash outflow. That is fine if the house is still actively serving the life you want. It is foolish if the house is mostly serving your reluctance to let a chapter end. I knew a couple once who had a beautiful home. Large kitchen, great yard, enough bedrooms for a busy family life. And for years it made perfect sense. Then the children left. The guest room stayed empty most of the year. The stairs became more annoying. The yard became work instead of pleasure. The utility bills kept rising. Every season something needed attention. They were not really living in the whole house anymore. They were living in one part and paying for all of it. That is a very expensive kind of nostalgia. When they finally sold and moved to a smaller place near the things they actually used, they expected to feel loss. What they mostly felt was relief. That is the key word, relief. A lot of good financial decisions near retirement should be judged by whether they create relief. Less cleaning, less upkeep, less tax burden, less insurance, less need to pull money from retirement accounts just to keep a building functioning. And there is a second layer people underestimate. A lower housing burden often reduces pressure everywhere else. If expenses fall, withdrawals can fall. If withdrawals fall, tax stress can ease. If tax stress eases, portfolio longevity improves. If maintenance falls, time opens. If time opens, life starts to feel like retirement instead of property management with nicer daytime lighting. This is not a sermon against staying in a beloved home. Some people absolutely should stay. Maybe the location is ideal. Maybe the structure is right for aging. Maybe the emotional value truly exceeds the burden. Maybe the house still fits the next chapter beautifully. Fine, keep it, but do not keep it by default. Keep it because after an honest hearing, it still earns its place. That is different. The second item people should examine is the extra vehicle that survived out of routine. Working life creates habits that continue long after the reasons disappear. Two cars often make perfect sense when two adults are commuting in opposite directions and children need to be moved in 12 different ways at once. Retirement changes the schedule, daily commuting vanishes or shrinks. The calendar softens, errands can be bundled, appointments can be arranged with more flexibility, yet many households continue carrying two vehicles, sometimes three, as if the old pattern were still in force. Cars are rarely just metal and rubber in a retirement budget. They are insurance, registration, maintenance, fuel repairs, eventual replacement, depreciation, unexpected failures. And because these costs arrive in pieces instead of one clean annual statement, people tend to underestimate them. That is how money gets lost. Not always through one huge mistake, often through ordinary arrangements left unchallenged. A second vehicle may well be worth it in some households. I do not worship simplicity for its own sake. I worship usefulness. If two vehicles still genuinely improve life enough to justify the full cost, fine, keep them. But again, do not keep them by habit. Test the assumption, live for 60 or 90 days as if you already had one vehicle and see what actually happens, not what you fear will happen, what actually happens. People are often surprised by how much they can adjust once the question stops being theoretical. One car can mean more coordination. Yes, it can also mean materially lower ongoing expense in a season where cash flow matters. It can mean fewer mechanical surprises. It can mean one less depreciating asset asking to be fed. That matters more than people admit, especially when insurance costs have climbed and repair bills now arrive, with the confidence of small extortion notes. The older I get, the more I admire arrangements that are simpler than they need to be, not more complicated than they need to be. Complexity should earn a premium. If it does not, remove it. The third issue is the one that tends to upset people because it is not sitting in the driveway or in the garage. It is sitting in the portfolio. Overly complex, high-fee, hard-to-explain financial products deserve far more suspicion near retirement than most people give them. A lot of people spent their working years accumulating accounts, the same way a family accumulates boxes in the attic, an old IRA here, a 401k rollover there, a variable annuity. Somebody sold them 20 years ago a whole life policy that made emotional sense once and financial sense almost never. Actively managed funds with fees that look small until you do the arithmetic over a decade. Private placements they barely understand. Niche products carrying layers of cost and paperwork. A mutual fund that has been around forever and therefore must be good, even though it quietly charges more than the value it adds. This happens because during working years complexity can hide inside momentum statements come. The market rises, people stay busy, nobody wants to pull the whole thing onto a table and ask whether every account, every product, and every fee is still justified. But retirement punishes laziness more harshly because the money is now supposed to support life, not merely sit there while a paycheck covers the gap. That changes the standard. If an investment cannot be explained clearly, you should be suspicious. If a product charges too much, you should be suspicious. If something creates tax irritation, paperwork burden, and mental clutter without a proportionate benefit, you should be suspicious. I have met plenty of intelligent people who mistook sophistication for quality. Those are not the same thing. The financial world loves complexity because complexity hides fees. Complexity creates dependence. Complexity makes the buyer feel small and the seller feel necessary. Simplicity, on the other hand, is hard to overcharge for. That is why simple structures often serve retirees better. I am not saying every advanced product is automatically bad. Some tools have legitimate uses, but many people nearing retirement have portfolios that look less like intentional design and more like archaeological sites. Layers from earlier decades remain because no one bothered to clean the structure. Consolidation matters more than people think, not because paperwork is glamorous, but because confusion is expensive. One IRA instead of 4 can be better. One or two institutions instead of a scattered mess can be better. A lower-cost portfolio that you understand is often better than a supposedly clever one that leaves you unsure what you own or why it is there. There is peace in clarity. Clarity is underrated because it does not brag. Still, it compounds. The retiree with a simpler financial structure is harder to rattle, easier to advise, easier to manage, and less likely to make panicked errors under stress. That is worth a great deal. I once knew a man with deep experience in finance who had access to all the so-called elite strategies. By the time he was thinking seriously about retirement, he had grown tired of complexity, not because he had become less intelligent, because he had become more intelligent about what complexity was costing him. He sold most of the elaborate exposures, simplified aggressively, lowered his fees, and held a structure he could explain on one sheet of paper. He did not become less sophisticated. He became less available to be exploited by sophistication theater. That is a better state. People like to ask what they should buy near retirement. I would often start with a different question: what can you stop paying for? That includes financial products. It also includes mental friction. The fourth area is the unused toys and storage. Heavy assets that no longer create active joy. This is an emotional category because it often holds dreams. The boat, the RV, the timeshare, the motorcycle you swore you would use more after work slowed down. The ATV, the old collection, the second garage full of tools for projects that no longer excite you the way they once did. The vacation property that sounded like a wonderful idea when life felt different. The problem is rarely that these things are evil. The problem is that they come with carrying costs, whether or not they are actively enriching your days. Insurance, storage, maintenance, registration, repairs, travel to reach them, time to justify them, the mental weight of knowing they are still there, still needing attention, still demanding a little part of your life. That quiet demand is what people ignore. I have seen people enter retirement imagining that the extra time will automatically revive old pleasures. Sometimes it does, sometimes the opposite happens. Retirement clarifies what was truly loved and what was mostly tied to a former identity. A man who restored cars in the middle of his career may discover that what he really loved was the project itself, not the permanent ownership of 6 finished vehicles. A woman who bought a vacation property may discover she actually enjoys being free to go anywhere, not feeling obligated to keep returning to the same place, because the property still needs to justify itself. A couple who bought an RV for a travel life they imagine may discover that the vehicle created a second system of maintenance rather than a larger sense of freedom. This is why I care so much about active use, not theoretical use, not identity use, not memory use, active use. If something is genuinely used, genuinely loved, and genuinely worth its carrying cost. Wonderful. Keep it. If it mostly survives because selling it would force an emotional admission, then be honest about that too. You are not preserving joy. You may be preserving a costume. A retirement filled with things you feel obligated to keep is not lighter than working life. It is merely a different form of work. That is a bad trade. One man I knew had several collectible vehicles. Each one had a story. Each one had craftsmanship behind it. Each one had sentimental value, and for a long time he defended the whole collection, as if selling any piece would diminish the life that produced it. Eventually he did something smart. He asked a question most collectors avoid. Which of these would I still actively keep if I had to start from zero today? That question cut through everything. He sold most of them and kept the one that still gave him genuine pleasure. Something interesting happened. The hobby became enjoyable again. It stopped feeling like inventory. He did not lose meaning. He regained focus. That is often what simplification does. It turns vague attachment into deliberate appreciation. The fifth category is the side business, rental property, or extra income machine that once made sense, but now behaves like a second job in disguise. This one is important because people confuse income with freedom. They are not the same thing. A rental property produces income. Yes, it can also produce tenant calls, repair requests, vacancy risk, capital expenditures, stress concentration risk, paperwork, and the permanent sense that one more small crisis is living in the walls waiting for a weekend. A side business can be profitable. It can also turn retirement into a continuation of deadlines with different stationery. This is where ego gets involved again. A person like saying, I still have the business, I still own the duplex, I still manage the property, I still make the deals, I still produce income from that stream. Fine, but what is the real net result after time, stress, risk, and concentration are properly priced? That is the question. A side business or real estate asset may absolutely be worth keeping if it is simple, profitable, and still satisfying. I am not arguing for passivity as a religion. I am arguing for intentionality. Some retirees genuinely enjoy light business activity. Some genuinely enjoy real estate. Some want the engagement. Some want the puzzle. Some want the cash flow. Good. Keep it if it is truly a feature of the life ahead. Sell it if it is mostly a leftover from the person you used to be. I have seen retired people cling to properties that made them miserable simply because selling felt like defeat. That is nonsense. Selling can be the wisest capital allocation decision available. One couple I knew owned a duplex for years. On paper, it looked like a good retirement asset. In reality, it was a low-grade source of ongoing annoyance. Tenants called repairs kept arriving. The accounting was never quite finished. The emotional cost was larger than the financial statement showed. When they sold, they did not become less secure. They became less interrupted. They converted bricks and midnight plumbing anxiety into liquid capital and calmer days. That is a serious gain. Again, the right question is not whether the asset once made sense. The question is whether it still makes sense for the season ahead. If the answer is no, then do not let history bully the future. That idea is useful far beyond real estate. Now I want to speak about the hidden sixth category that sits underneath all five of these. It is not an object. It is not an account. It is not a vehicle. It is not a building. It is identity. Identity is the quiet force behind many bad retirement decisions. People keep the oversized house because it still proves something. They keep the second car because it still fits the image of themselves they are reluctant to question. They keep the complex investments because sophistication flatters them. They keep the unused toys because they represent a younger, more exciting, more adventurous self. They keep the rental property or side business because being an operator still feels safer than becoming a person who simply enjoys life without producing proof. That is what makes simplification so difficult. You are not merely selling an item. You are renegotiating a story, and stories cling hard. A man who spent 30 years becoming the provider can feel guilty reducing support to adult children even when doing so is the right move. A woman who spent decades building a family home can feel disloyal for downsizing even when the house no longer supports her best life. A former executive can feel diminished by a simpler life because the old symbols made his importance visible. These are human reactions. They are not financially useful reactions unless brought under control. I do not think retirement should be seen as a long exit ramp into irrelevance. I think it should be seen as a reallocation of your remaining capital. Money capital, time capital, health capital, attention capital, emotional capital. The right retirement strips away the things that consume those capitals without producing enough return. That is what rational allocation means. You do not keep every position in a portfolio out of nostalgia. You do not keep every obligation in life out of nostalgia either. You review, you judge, you keep the strongest, you cut the weakest, you protect the core that is intelligent in markets and intelligent in retirement. So how would I make these decisions? If I were sitting in your chair, I would use a very simple framework. First, does this thing serve the life ahead or mostly serve the life behind? That question is devastatingly effective because it removes a lot of camouflage. The life behind might have required the house, the extra car, the scattered financial setup, the toys, and the business. Does the life ahead require them? Not. Can you keep them? Require them. That distinction matters. Second, what is the true cost? Not only the invoice, the true cost, direct cost. Yes, taxes, fees, premiums, maintenance, utilities, storage, fuel, repairs, and lost yield. But also time cost. How many hours a year does this claim? Attention cost. How often does it interrupt peace? Flexibility cost. Does it limit where you can live, how long you can travel, or how lightly you can move? Stress cost. Does it create little anxieties that keep returning when people do this? Honestly, many favorite possessions start looking less like treasures and more like part-time employees who invoice the owner. Third, what becomes possible if I let it go? This is where the whole subject changes from sacrifice to design. Sell the too large house and perhaps you unlock travel, lower withdrawals, easier aging, and less maintenance. Sell the second vehicle and perhaps you free up cash flow and reduce friction. Consolidate and simplify the portfolio and perhaps you buy peace, clarity, and lower fees. Sell the unused toys and perhaps you gain liquidity and mental space. Sell the draining rental or the side business that no longer fits and perhaps you buy time, simplicity, and lower concentration risk. Those are not small gains. And because people are so afraid of losing what is familiar, they often fail to price what simplification gives them. That is a serious mistake. Relief has value, mobility has value, lower fixed cost has value, clarity has value, peace of mind has value. Anyone who has lived long enough knows this, even if he does not always act like he knows it. If I were uncertain, I would run trials before making permanent choices. Trial periods are excellent because they replace fantasy with evidence. Live for 90 days as if the second car were already gone. Handle life as if the house were smaller. Stop engaging in the extra business activity for a defined season, and ask whether you miss the income or whether you miss the identity of being busy. Pull every investment onto one page and ask whether each piece truly belongs. Visit the vacation property or the garage full of toys with one question in mind. If I did not already own this, would I buy it today for the life ahead? That question should be mandatory in late life planning because old items survive too often on sunk cost logic. I paid a lot. I worked hard for this. It used to matter fine. None of those statements answer the real question. Would you choose it again now? If not, then be brave enough to notice the answer. I also want to say what this is not. This is not a call to strip your life bare. This is not a call to become joyless, minimal for its own sake, or proud of deprivation. That would be silly. I want people to keep the things that actively add life, the house that genuinely supports the best years ahead, the car that makes life meaningfully easier, the hobby asset you actually use and love, the investment structure that is clear, low cost, and efficient, the property or project that still energizes you without overburdening you. Keep what adds life. Release what only adds weight. That is the whole principle. Some retirees make the opposite mistake. They keep everything because letting go feels scary. Then they discover they have preserved a pile of obligations and called it stability. That is not stability. That is clutter with a financial statement. Others overreact and strip away too much, too quickly without enough thought. That is not wisdom either. The right answer is deliberate pruning, not denial, not frenzy. Pruning. A good tree grows better after it is pruned intelligently. So does a retirement. Now let us talk about one more issue that people rarely say out loud. Helping adult children can quietly become one of the heaviest invisible burdens in retirement planning. I know this subject can make people tense. Good. It deserves seriousness. Parents want to help. That impulse is beautiful. It can also become dangerous when support turns from occasional help into an ongoing transfer that competes with your own future security. Retirement is not the stage of life where you can assume there will always be time to recover from generous mistakes. Younger people can rebuild. Older people can too, but the cost is higher because time is shorter and health becomes less predictable. There are no loans for extra healthy retirement years. There is no institution that gives you back freedom at 73 because you were too willing to subsidize someone else's avoidable dependence at 65. That is why boundaries matter. Helping children in a real emergency can be wise. Financing adulthood because it feels emotionally easier than saying no is a very different thing. A lot of retirees quietly carry resentment because they keep giving beyond what is prudent and call it love. Love and enabling are not the same thing. Sometimes the kindest thing is a firmer answer. You do not serve your children by destroying your own margin and then pretending everyone is noble. A retirement strained by guilt is not a well-designed retirement. This too is a form of clutter: financial clutter, emotional clutter, obligation clutter. If support is preventing you from simplifying, traveling, saving, sleeping, or using your own resources wisely, then the arrangement deserves the same standard we apply to every other asset. Does it still earn its place? That question can save people years of quiet regret. The more I study money, the more I think the real danger in retirement is not lack alone. It is unexamined burden. A person can have enough but still feel constrained because too much of his life is attached to the past. A person can have slightly less but feel freer because he released what no longer deserved renewal. That is why I admire retirees who get serious about simplification before crisis forces it. Doing it early is usually a choice. Doing it late is often a reaction. I prefer choice. Choice preserves dignity. Choice preserves leverage. Choice lets you sell the house when you want to, not when you have to. Choice lets you simplify the portfolio while your mind is clear, not under pressure. Choice lets you unload unused assets before the market or your health turns against you. Choice is worth protecting. One of the best uses of money is buying yourself better choices. One of the worst uses of money is maintaining arrangements that reduce them. So if I were near retirement right now, I would sit with a blank sheet and make a list. What in my life still creates active value? What in my life survives mostly because of habit? What in my life survives because I am afraid to admit a chapter is over? What in my life costs more in time, money, energy, or flexibility than it returns? That list will tell you more than another hour of watching market television, because retirement quality is built from structure, not only from market performance. Markets matter, yes, taxes matter, withdrawal rates matter, asset allocation matters, but the person living inside the wrong structure can still feel crowded even with a decent portfolio. Meanwhile, the person who simplifies intelligently often discovers that what looked like sacrifice was really a trade for better days. That is the goal: better days, not bigger piles of stuff, not more proofs of former success. Better days. If a thing helps create those, keep it. If it repeatedly steals them, be willing to let it go. That is not loss. That is capital allocation. And at this stage of life, capital allocation should include the most important capital of all, time. Time is the one asset that does not refill after retirement begins. That is why I become almost ruthless in how I think about unnecessary burdens late in life. A large house that demands too much, a car you do not need, an expensive tangle of high-fee products, a garage of unused toys, a side business or property that feels more like an unpaid boss than a blessing. An open-ended stream of financial support that weakens your own footing. None of these are automatically wrong, but each deserves to be asked the same question: do you still serve me, or am I now serving you? That question can change a life. Most people avoid it because they fear what the answer might require. Still, courage in retirement is rarely about extreme adventure. Often it is about honest simplification. The courage to say this house served us beautifully, and now it is time. The courage to say we do not need that second car. The courage to say these accounts are too messy and too expensive. The courage to say I do not need 4 toys to prove I lived. The courage to say that investment property, that side venture, or that obligation to adult children no longer fits the life ahead. The courage to become lighter on purpose. That is what I would want. Not emptiness, not austerity for show, lightness. A life where money supports meaning instead of maintenance. A life where possessions serve daily joy instead of inherited inertia. A life where complexity has been cut back enough that peace can finally breathe. That is the retirement I would choose. And if I had to summarize the whole thing in one clean line, it would be this. Retirement is not only the moment to ask whether you have enough, it is the moment to ask whether you are still carrying too much. Once you answer that honestly, the next chapter often becomes much clearer. Not because the market changed, because you did. And that is usually where real freedom begins.